Welcome back to this episode of E2G Hockey, present on E2G Sports Network. This is a very special episode. This is the first intro I've been doing, which is how you know that things are about to get interesting. To say that it's been a tumultuous 72 plus hours has been an understatement. We'll kind of recap. First off, Danny, how are you?
I'm good. I went on a run trying to calm my frustrations, but apparently that didn't do any good. And I'm at a new. I'm trying to be as diplomatic as possible in tonight's episode because I'm kind of on one, my friend.
If there's one thing that we aren't, it's diplomatic. So I am excited for this one personally. I will say, I say we go right into it. I think the biggest topic of conversation and pretty much the only topic of conversation we'll have today is going to be circulating around the New York Rangers and the Washington Capitals. I think this is going to be a very interesting episode. We're going to be covering a lot, very in depth. You have a lot to say, so I'm going to be kind of stepping back and really letting you go with this. I think the best way to kind of stop this that doesn't get rambly is really to go in chronological order. So,
Yeah,
in my eyes, the best place to start is, what was it, Tuesday's night game? The first game against the Capitals, was it Tuesday
yeah,
night?
that would be the first place to start, and I
Okay.
think go out from there.
Okay, so I'll briefly kind of understand and elaborate as to what's going on, and I'll kind of let you go from there because this is
Yeah.
where really everything snowballs. So on Tuesday night, this was at Madison Square Garden, correct? At
Mhm.
MSG. So the Washington Capitals played the New York Rangers. A little late in the game, there's a scrum in the corner. Long story short, Tom Wilson and Artemi Panarin get into an incident. Tom Wilson then throws down multiple times, maybe like two times, throws down Artemi Panarin to the ice without a helmet. Essentially, you learned within the next 24 hours after that, taking him out for the season. So, Danny, take me back to kind of what you were feeling. Were you watching that game live?
Yeah, that one. Um, that was the last night the Rangers had an opportunity to kind of still battle for the playoffs, and I kind of knew that, like, hey, there's a lot to it's no surprise. I don't hide it well that I'm a New York Rangers fan. I've been my entire life. So I wanted to watch the last four games in a very peculiar year where we have a lot of young talent and see these players kind of get more opportunity. Kind of, now that the playoff push was over, I was excited to see guys like Lafreniere get a little more ice time, Kravtsov, those guys that are finally making their jump. And so to go back to that play specifically, there's a point that I'm realizing now that I don't think I've articulated, but was kind of just knowledge to me the entire time, is that this was on the power play, right? So you got to think about who's on the ice at the time, right? It was their first power play unit of the night. Kreider's out, so it's Buchnevich filling in for Kreider. You have Zibanejad, Panarin, Strome, and I believe Adam Fox was the fifth one. He should
These are
be at least.
scoring. These are scoring players.
Right. This is the top skill guys for the Rangers, right? Going against the penalty PK unit, who's the best defensive unit on the ice. And if you look at what you mentioned Panarin, but what's so upsetting and frustrating, if you haven't seen the plays itself that kind of erupted from all this, you know, you just go online, go to egsports.com. We have an article up on it now. We should have a second one any day now, at least a third or fourth. Who knows how many at this point, because the story is just going to continue to evolve, it feels like, because we haven't seen anything like this before, not in recent memory at least. Wilson is assessed 14 penalty minutes, right? And then puts on a show of antics in the penalty box and really provokes and attacks the Rangers. When I'm watching it live, I couldn't believe my eyes, right? Because it was just such a violent show of events, right? First things first, Buchnevich tries to push the puck in the net, try to battle in the crease to get a little tip in. And while his head is inches from the ground, Tom Wilson punches Buchnevich square into the ice, right? From there, Ryan Strome jumps on the back to pull Tom Wilson off of him. And then Tom Wilson then turns around and goes after Strome. From there, Panarin jumps on the back of Tom Wilson to pull him off of Strome. And that's when things escalate to a new level, right? Now, you mentioned all of this. You mentioned that we were watching live. And Chelsea, my wife, who gets often mentioned now on the podcast, it seems, she's here, by the way. We found her. She came back from Australia. We're watching the game, and she's just like, holy shit, right? She's never seen anything like this, right? She goes, this is one of the most violent things I've ever seen. I go, I don't see this too often, especially with the skill guys going against the penalty. It just was when Tom. It was three or four guys against Tom Wilson. Tom Wilson
Horrific,
just,
really.
yeah. So you talk about all of this, and we're expecting a suspension, considering that Tom Wilson has already received a 7-game suspension earlier in the season for that boarding, which we debated, I think, on like episode 2 of the podcast, right? Maybe even episode 1 early on. We talked about how I thought it was a suspension. I thought 7 was too much, and you thought that it was a suspension of 1 or 2, right? If I recall correctly. So I thought, okay, the entire league, everyone thought that this would be a suspension.
Which a good point to make. Normally, when guys receive more than that 2-3 games, when you get up to the 7-10 games, the league is typically very strict. You look at Rafi Torres, who I think got like a 14-game suspension, and then after that he was done. I think it was something to that effect. So normally, when you are seeing a previous history of a suspension that robust, the league is very well inclined to really crack down, because in a lot of times the league views it as you haven't given them any other choice, which I think is equally as jarring in this instance.
Right. And so the everyone was going on is that this was Tom Wilson flying off the rails as Tom Wilson does. Daniel Carcillo said that, one of the great quotes that came from this, he's like, he's got unresolved trauma that he works out, I believe is what his quote was. Like he did personally. He acknowledged it. He's like, he is one of those people that is just working through his trauma on the ice. He is one of those people. He goes, that's when I became, Daniel Carcillo is known as Car Bomb, right? He goes, I could see that voice when that was me not able to work through my life experiences. He says, I identify in Tom Wilson what I personally was going through, right? What the big takeaway is that the league, the Department of Player Safety, opted to give, instead of a suspension, just gave him a $5,000 penalty, a fine, right? And we've talked about $5,000 fines in the show before in terms of what the lobbing of the helmet, for instance. They're saying those are equal events. And if you look at the statement, because there was no analysis or breakdown of the event, just a simple statement that Tom Wilson was fined $5,000 for punching Bushnevich. It had nothing to do with him pulling Panarin's hair, yanking him to the ice, repeatedly tossing about multiple times. It had nothing to do with any of the other actions that transpired that people are calling into it. It just focused on the one thing with no analysis. And I'm going to fast forward. I want to talk about this again, but there was another suspension that just got called today. And of course, there was an analysis. So why wasn't there an analysis on this suspension with Tom Wilson? That's something that I'm going to want to talk about at some point in this episode. But those are the events. And from there, God.
And I guess from there it goes, obviously there was a crazy aftermath. Everything kind of blew up on social media. Everyone was talking about it. I think there you kind of go, there is obviously a very big public outcry. You look at the fact that, the max available fine was $5,000, but at the same time, you're also looking, if you're the NHL, if you're George Parros in that position, don't you look at that and say, okay, well, the only thing we can fine him is $5,000. That doesn't really seem like a good indication of what happened there. We need to throw some games at this. And I forget exactly, I read a good quote where there was some incident earlier in the year where Parros also didn't want to give out some discipline, and then Gary Bettman got involved. Do you remember hearing about this? This is kind of getting slightly off topic, but there was one instance previously where Parros didn't want to give anything. The player got hurt, and then Bettman stepped in and gave him a suspension. I forget the exact instance. I can look it up.
I don't, but I felt like this was an instance where that should have happened because of what happened to Panarin. It's so interesting because you and I talk about frequently on this podcast about how a suspension should not be contingent on, or it should, if an injury happens, it should not demand a suspension, rather, right?
Which I still partially stand by, and I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more. that being said, this entire incident, I look at incidents where players are maybe throwing elbows around a little bit more, or maybe it's a really tall player versus a really short player.
Correct.
I look at those incidents a little bit different than throwing around and ragdolling, one of the best players in the league by a player that is significantly bigger, stronger, taller.
Who's just trying not trying to fight the guy, trying to break it up, right?
Yeah.
And if you look in the one angle, you see him yanking him down by the hair, right? And for it to resolve with a potential, I think, a neck injury.
I didn't see what it was, but I mean, if anything, you're almost thankful that it wasn't a head injury, right? Like, I mean, the way you saw him kind of going down, it could have been bad, right? Like, that could be, he could have left on a stretcher, right? Like, it could have been very, very bad. So we'll kind of keep going, and I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more. But so from here, I think after kind of the after cry and, the aftermath of everything going on and social media kind of erupting, there was a very big distinction between Caps fans and everyone else. It seemed like everyone was kind of going on Twitter and whatever it may be. I think the next response after this is probably, ironically enough, or at least the next point in the timeline is probably, ironically enough, a Twitter post by the New York Rangers, correct?
There in terms of that public outcry, I think it's important to note who the outcry was. It wasn't from just fans. It was former enforcers of the league. George LaRock said, "I'll step in and I'll fight him over that nonsense."
John Scott, another notable one too.
A respectable one. You have Sean Avery saying the crazy things that he would do. Sean Avery, who would push that envelope, saying that. Daniel Carcillo, somebody else jumped in. Some other big names just jumping in saying, what just happened is not okay. And the fact that the league, the big takeaway is that the Department of Player Safety is supposed to be taking care of it, right? Okay, something awful happened on the ice. Well, the Department of Player Safety is supposed to protect the players, right? And they didn't. So what does that leave you to do? It relieves you, the players, to protect themselves, right? Well, the league has been going away from a less physical, less violent game trying to do that. But all of a sudden you're saying, well, our star players aren't safe, right? And so we have to now, you're inviting, us reverting back to the 90s, to the 70s, to the 80s, where your star players had to play on a line with the guy who was going to protect them all of a sudden. The game just changed because the NHL refused to step in. And that is when the New York Rangers...
I'll interrupt you there because I think those are really good points that we'll get into Wednesday. Let me just kind of chime in and then we can kind of go back and forth. So after that, you see the Twitter post, which I think you're getting into, the Twitter post from the New York Rangers, which was lengthy, right? About a paragraph. And the gist of it is whatever, they're disappointed. And I think the big sentiment that left me shocked and left a lot of other players and just everyone shocked was one of the final sentences, if not the last one, which was kind of pointing towards Parros's, basically his competence in operating as the head of player safety and how this was handled. And, I cannot remember the last time that I've seen a team this adamantly speak out against a league official, the league, anything. I can't remember a time where I've ever heard a statement like this, especially from not a coach or a GM, an organization, right? This had a New York Rangers letterhead on it. What were your thoughts when you saw that?
It's a great question because there's a lot. First thing, I think the last time that something like this happened, I think it was the San Jose Sharks in like the early 2000s called for a call for a referee made on the ice. And to know what that happened, so we know, just to see where we're going, the San Jose Sharks in the mid-2000s, I think, were fined $100,000 for that statement. So to see it again was kind of jarring, knowing that the consequences have been made public, right? One, I was proud of the Rangers. I'll say that, right? We're not okay with what happened here. This isn't a conversation of political correctness where we're trying to stifle we're saying we're not happy with our player got hurt. We were not trying to cancel anybody. We just want this to be resolved, right? George Parros became public enemy number one. I know I just threw a lot in there, which can be combative real quick. You can argue what I just said. But at the end of the day, I was proud that the New York Rangers did something. I didn't expect that. I didn't expect them to do anything. I expected them to kind of just honestly take take it, and the players were going to say some things in some press conferences, call it a joke like they did, right? Strom spoke out. But what that did, Tyson, which I think it just created a giant staring contest, right? It created a staring contest between the NHL and the New York Rangers, where you have an original six franchise, a franchise that is worth more than any other team in the league, is taking on the entire Gary Bettman, George Parros, and the NHL and saying, nope, what are you going to do about it? We're not okay with this. What are you going to do about it? We want him gone. So now all of a sudden, we're in this weird standstill, this arms race of who's going to make the next move, what's going to happen, right? And I think from here, the next thing chronologically is a move that nobody saw coming. There was no way you could have predicted this, and that was James Dolan, the owner of the New York Rangers, released a statement that, or the New York Rangers or someone released a statement that president of operations, president of hockey, John Davidson, and general manager Jeff Gorton were relieved of their duties.
And very specifically said that this had nothing to do with the events of the previous 24 hours.
Which is a hard pill of coincidence to swallow.
Especially when you probably know that you just lost $250,000.
Now, here's the thing. I was initially, you talk about my initial reactions, I was livid because what this said to me at the time is that Dolan succumbed to the pressures of Bettman in the league. He said, he was like, what's going on in your organization? If you want to remain or what have you, or you don't want to be slapped with a fine, you got to nip this in the bud, right? And so I thought instead of Dolan's taking his side with his players, with his front office, he caved. And I was so upset, and I felt defeated as a Rangers fan. Now, other details have come to find out, but that was my initial response. And the pill of coincidence, as I'll call it right now, didn't sit right. How is that possible? Are you telling me that with the biggest event we've had, the biggest call out we've had in league history, perhaps, had nothing to do, right? So the league had until, because the Rangers are playing the Capitals again that very night or the next night, so or the day of the firing. So waking up that morning, we had until 7 p.m. for the league to respond to the Rangers' demands. Instead, the Rangers responded internally, which was so unexpected and so confusing and so deflating at the time. But also said, hey, 7 p.m. is much-watched television. Whatever happens at 7 p.m., because the league didn't handle it, the general manager is gone, the president is gone, David Quinn, who people are on the fence about, the coach is still there. There was a lot of weird what is going to happen. And they also canceled their media day that morning. So there was no talking to the press going in. So you have all these crazy events happening. And then the more rumors started coming out and more information. Apparently, Dolan is saying the firing happened because the team was underachieving. Well, you're only 3 years from when you gave out the infamous letter that said that the team will be rebuilding. As far as rebuilds go, you can't do much better. You've come across with the second overall pick in 2019, the first overall pick in 2020. You've gone from one of the lower teams in the league where you've gone through a drastic rebuild, and you've brought in great talent. You brought in a star in Artemi Panarin. You found a way to be competitive amidst all of this, with, I think, $15 million in dead money on cap as well. There's a lot of things that you're still managing to do that'll be off the books in a year or two. As a Rangers fan, I was like, there's no way we're going to be a Stanley Cup team this year. We're going to be a Stanley Cup team in a year or two. So I think 22-23 was my year prediction where we could actually take a legitimate shot, because the amount of money will be off the books that we could go out and get another players. By that point, if you look at the free agent center market, that is when you go. So for him to say we're underachieving, well, no shit. We were supposed to underachieve. Rangers fans had this great expectation, so I don't buy that. But now the rumors are this. I thought the entire time that the statement that was made that cost, as we now know, would be eventually fined $250,000, right? That statement didn't come from the front office. And in fact, Jeff Gorton and Davidson didn't want anything to do with. In fact, it came from Dolan. So Dolan's the one who took the shot. Dolan's the one who went against it, right? So that's new information. And apparently he was frustrated with Davidson and Gorton in terms of their direction with the team. And he's like, we have Chris Drury as our associate GM waiting to go. I want him as president and I want him as GM. And when he wanted to fire Gorton or fire Davidson, Gorton said, I'm going too. And he said, fine. And then that's the current rumor floating about. If that's the case, that's Dolan sticking up for the team, right? More than the front office, which is confusing. I don't know if it's the right move. So
which I definitely wasn't expecting. I definitely didn't expect to hear that. I thought the first scenario was a lot more feasible. That kind of threw a whirlwind my way, for sure.
That's the latest one that I'm having a hard time. So I'm still sitting here going, what am I looking at? What do I do? You know, who do I, as a fan, who do I side with, right? Well, now we're talking just the politics of the game. So if we want to get me back on track real quick, I hope I've kept it concise and to the point. But that's the information as it stands in terms of the politics surrounding up until game night.
Which I guess that's where we go from here, right? So it's last night, 7:00 Eastern, and I know there was a lot of rumbling. I don't think anyone knew exactly what was going to happen, but I think they got an answer pretty quick. I'm sure you were glued to your couch last night, right?
We were watching history. You and I are talking. I'm texting with Derek. I'm texting everybody I know. We can't believe what in the hell we are watching. Okay. Opening puck drop. You have Rooney, DiGiuseppe, and who was the other one? You have guys. The point is, Washington has a bunch of big bodies, right? Who can chuck them really well. You have Brendan Dillon. You have Tom Wilson still. You have Zdeno Chara at 44, who is still a frightening human being. The Rangers don't have that because the Rangers built a different type of team. They're big fighters. Brendan Lemieux, they traded to the LA Kings early on. Ryan Lindgren's injured. Chris Kreider is injured. All of the guys that would normally step up and answer the call were gone. But at puck drop, 3 guys on the Washington Capitals, 3 guys on the New York Rangers at the opening faceoff dropped them. We're talking 2 seconds into the game. There's 3 fights. The last time this happened was the New York Rangers as well. 2012 under John Tortorella, right? I think he was Rupp, Bickle, and Prost for the Rangers. Did the exact same thing. And so I can't believe I'm watching it twice in my time as a diehard fan. 2012 and what is it, 2021? So 9 years apart.
Almost 10 years apart. Yeah,
right.
A full decade apart.
Different coaches, 2 coaches in between, or a coach in between Vigneault. But then that stops. Then Tom Wilson gets on the ice for the very first time, and Brendan Smith doesn't play. As soon as Tom Wilson touches the puck,
identifies him very quickly.
How do the entire crowd did as soon as 43 got on the ice. You could hear a crowd of Rangers fans booing like they've never booed before. You would think that was a full arena.
It sounded like a full arena.
Oh my God. If you're buying a ticket, that's the ticket to buy last night. So all of a sudden we have another fight. In 50 seconds into the game, we had 5 fights transpire. We finished at 6, and we collected over 120 penalty minutes. The score doesn't matter. Rangers lost, but in a lot of ways they won. Okay?
Which I do want to interject quickly. Excluding Tom Wilson, I think you do have to show a lot of respect to the Rangers and the Capitals players too. I'm sure there were a lot of Capitals players that maybe didn't agree with what Wilson did, but understood that something needed to be answered because their teammate messed up, right? So regardless of what they thought, maybe they agreed with it, maybe they didn't. I did appreciate from the Capitals' perspective, excluding Wilson, obviously, that they showed up and they answered for their teammate.
I want to call out one in particular as one of my favorite players to ever watch. He's one of those guys that should be a bigger name in households, but is not because he's always been a third scoring option on a team. Is TJ Oshie. TJ Oshie, for those that don't know, this was his first game back after losing his father. His father just passed away. His father's had memory issues and Alzheimer's issues for a number of years. called him coach. Both teams wore a coach sticker on the back of their helmets, I believe, in honor of him because he made a big impact on a lot of players' careers, actually. And out of respect for TJ Oshie. TJ Oshie comes back in his first game, despite anything else, scores a hat trick, right? Good on you. One of them was an empty net, 2 first goals of the game. You know what? I've always been an Oshie fan. If you watch that Russia-USA shootout, it's historic. It should go down in history as one of the greatest USA hockey moments of all time. It's up there with the 1980 Miracle Team. It's that fantastic. TJ Oshie deserves a lot of love and praise. I think we got to acknowledge that. And I think you're right. I'm angry, but I shouldn't be angry at every single Capitals player for his stupidity, for Wilson's stupidity, who is a thug in my eyes. I don't think I've ever seen a player fall further from grace in my eyes.
Which it is disappointing too, because you look at a lot of guys. You mentioned Dan Carcillo, you mentioned Georges Laraque. I don't know if any of those guys could play like Tom Wilson did. You know what I mean? No. Say what you want. Tom Wilson is a good hockey player offensively. He's very capable. He's capable of playing on a first set. He's capable of playing throughout your lineup. So it definitely is unfortunate to see just someone with that talent and that ability behave in this way.
He's, I think, the closest player comparison that comes to mind for me. He's not quite as good, but would be Jamie Benn at his best out of Dallas. Just in terms of size, physicality, he's got hands. He just doesn't have the hands of Ben.
But the things that this guy could do if he really didn't focus on the extracurriculars, right? And really focused on being that goal scorer next to whoever he's playing with. This is a guy who could feasibly do very, very well in the league. Not that he hasn't up until this point, but a guy that could really be a good scoring option in the league. But it seems that a lot of extracurriculars have derailed that.
Do you know who I also want to give credit to that I don't think we've even considered, because no fan would really ever do this? I want to give some credit to the refs for handling that game.
Tough situation.
That is,
you could use 20 officials on the ice that night.
Well, it was a no-nonsense night. Zdeno Chara went over and started chirping Brendan Smith later on. He's like, 10, get out of here. Come back next period. We're not doing this. I don't care. They sent off Tom Wilson earlier for going after with Rooney, gave him both 10s. Then Wilson didn't return with an upper body injury, which was smart on the Capitals, by the way. Upper body.
I want to chime in a little bit on, and we'll go into the officials. I think the officials very much did last night what the NHL didn't the previous game, which is stay in control of the game and protect the players and protect the teams. And listen, if I'm the refs in that situation, I'm just trying to get out without people, losing their head over this. So I do show a lot of respect to the refs because of that. I'll ask you, but I felt a very certain way. At the same time, are you able to put Wilson back into that game? But if I'm Tom Wilson and I really want to play and I have respect, you can't hold me out of that game. So it does take two parties there. I am, like you, I'm sure, tremendously skeptical of this apparent upper body injury to Tom Wilson.
There wasn't one.
I think it's a joke. I think he can't do anything there. At the same time, I think there's been a lot of mistakes happened in league history. There's been a lot of injuries. I think the thing that distinguishes the players that will later gain respect or lose it are those that are willing to answer for their problems. I think if you're throwing a dirty hit, whatever, this situation is escalated, but whatever you do, if you're not willing to answer to that and you run away, I think you lose respect in the eyes of a lot of people. And not that Tom Wilson had that much respect left after Tuesday's game, but no. I think Wednesday night showed that I don't know if there's too many people in his corner anymore. What did you think after you saw that injury report?
There wasn't an injury. Let's call it what it is. It was, we all knew it, quote unquote. The announcers of the game called it, quote unquote, injury, But here's the thing. You can't leave him in. You can't. So from a fan perspective, from a Ranger perspective, I want blood, right? I want it. That's bad to say. I've never wished ill on a player, but I wanted him. I felt his punishment was not met, right? Like he hadn't gotten the
And
proper beating he
also,
deserved.
is that Tom Wilson's fault?
That's a good question. Well, no, it's not Tom Wilson's fault. It's the league's fault.
It's his fault for doing it, but those aren't the rules, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the league got it wrong, and that put Artemi Panarin and the Rangers in danger. That also put Tom Wilson in danger. I
Right.
think
Tom Wilson stays in, he gets hurt for real in a bad way, and someone makes a mistake on the Rangers. And that
yeah.
somebody kind of made a mistake on the Rangers. Pavel Buchnevich took it a little too far. He was kind of waving a stick a little too loosely. He kind of slashed at Wilson at one point. Chara's like, none of that. Chara's one of the more respectable players in the entire league and wasn't having that, right? And
Which
then
he
Anthony
did ultimately see that boil over in that incident with
Anthony
Buchnevich and
Mantha.
Mantha, where he got the cross check to the face of Mantha.
I tweeted it out last night. The winners of last night are this, okay? New York Rangers pride, TJ Oshie's resilience, Morgan Barron for scoring his first NHL goal. You can't take it away from him despite the game. Can you hear me still?
Yeah.
And then the big winner of last night, Anthony Mantha's dentist. Because holy hell, he took a shot from Buchnevich to the mouth.
And Mantha's had a rough time. You know, he's been doing well, but you're seeing Jacob Vrana in Detroit lighting it up, getting all these first star accolades. Mantha's a great player, and, you know, like, he hasn't known Tom Wilson for that long. They're probably not that good of friends. Like, they've maybe gone out to dinner once, if that, probably not because of COVID. Like, he probably didn't have any dogs in this fight.
Right, and he's like trying to make a good impression, trying to stay with the team long term because he is going to be there long term. And you know, he was chasing Buchnevich around, and then he tried to go a little high on Buchnevich, and Buchnevich went higher.
Buchnevich went really high.
Yeah, and that, you know, when I watched that, I go, they're going to suspend him for that, and that'll be the more ironic thing of it. And they, guess what? Come around today. Yes, they did. They gave a one-game suspension.
Which I guess is good? Question mark.
Oh, the league's back to the, you know.
I guess it's good. I guess they learned their lesson.
That's what pisses me off. That's what right there. They suspend him, but then they give the analysis on why they're suspending him. And I go, where the hell was that analysis for the Tom Wilson fine? Where was it? Why wasn't that here? You did your job fully this time, but you didn't on the other? That doesn't, you can't have it both ways. And in those moments I go, let's bring back Brendan Shanahan. Let's do that. You know, what's hell, put Sean Avery in that role. I don't care.
Well, and now we get to the point where we're not quite at the climax of the story, but we do get to an interesting point that I think will be intriguing to kind of cover. Where does George Parros sit now? Where do we go from here? Where does he sit? How does this proceed? Like, what does this look like? Because to me, it doesn't look good.
Parros will try to keep a low profile, do his job. The season's almost over. Bettman holds the cards, I guess.
I can't think Gary likes this.
No.
Any part of this.
But who likes Gary? That's the question.
Say what you want, man. The NHL's never been in a better financial point, you know, pre and post COVID, relatively, right? So say what you want. I also think Gary's a lawyer. He's very smart and calculated, and say what you want. But the man has made the league a lot of money, and you know, pre-COVID, the salary cap was going to be higher than it's ever been before. Right. So say what you want there, but Gary's smart. Gary saw that. I promise you, Gary didn't like the Wilson incident. I promise you he didn't like the aftermath of it. I promise you he didn't like what happened to the Rangers, and I promise you he hated what happened yesterday. So I would be, at the same time, you've hired someone for that job. You know, indirectly, that's not Gary's job. He's hired someone. There's a whole department whose job it is to deal with that. Gary's the commissioner of the league. He can go in and, you know, override things and say things exactly. So optically, you can't just go in and throw your guy under the bus, but I would be surprised if things behind the curtains weren't exactly all daisies. You know what I mean? I would be surprised if things weren't ugly right now at the Department of Player Safety offices in New York City.
So, you know, yeah, to your point about Bettman being mad, wouldn't be happy about yesterday. Yeah. Okay. Here's another thing we haven't talked about yet. This was on NBC. This wasn't like it was on like a local regional station or just on the NHL network. No, this was broadcast across the entire world yesterday, right? And that this is the image you put out in a game that you texted me. You're like, when was the last time we ever saw a game like this? I joked with like a hyperbole of a response, like when a riot broke out in 1955, after a game. But that's the joke right now. So, as a parting gift to the NBC, though, I'm sure they gave them the best ratings of the NHL season. You weren't turning that off. I think there's just so much, and I'm sure the Rangers are playing, I think, right now, and it's exhausting. This whole series is exhausting. I don't miss a game, but I'm exhausted right now with the New York Rangers, and not with them, not with the. I'm just, this whole experience isn't fair to the fans. Let me ask you this, Tyson, because I'm wrestling with this internally. Did you enjoy yesterday's game?
I didn't love a second of it. I hated it. I don't like that.
No? Are you being sarcastic or serious?
No, that's not really the game I like. I don't like enforcing. Like, I think the league's in the best place it's ever been because of scoring, and you want to enable these guys. Like, these guys didn't come up fighting through junior. I do think there is a place for physical players and guys that hit, and I like that, but I want nothing to do with line brawls. And yeah, I think in my perfect world, Wilson does this and he's suspended for the rest of the year or through playoffs or whatever, right? And we kind of get solution to this problem. I hated it. I didn't like yesterday. That's not my type of hockey.
I think from a karma standpoint for the league, I
do also think it was necessary. Let me say that. I am understanding of the response. I'm not upset at any players for doing it. I think this is what happens when the league doesn't step in. Players have to. So I'm not upset at anything that happened yesterday, but I wish it didn't need to get to this point.
Right. They brought it, the league brought it to that level. And they put it on the players. And the players said, well, a lot of us, this is going to be our last game of the season. I'll pull up some guys and let them ride it out, which is probably what's playing tonight. Bushnevich is done for the year. I think a couple of them others are too. They're just like, nope, we're gonna get healthy and come back in a new place. I again, to your point, I'm not turning away. I'm not enjoying this. This isn't an NHL game. This isn't the skill. This isn't the flash. This isn't what we've come to expect. But I like your point of it being necessary. What you said earlier, we're not at the climax of the story. What to you is the climax of the story?
I don't know if I think yesterday was the climax. Maybe climax was the improper storytelling way of proceeding through the events that's happened through this week. But I think maybe the final act in this is the fine that's coming forward of the league from the New York Rangers and the statement the league put out. What did you think? Obviously, for those that don't know, the league issued a $250,000 fine to the New York Rangers for speaking out against their league and their staff. In a brief statement that the league put out, I think it was today or yesterday or whenever it was. What did you think as you saw that kind of roll in?
Well, I think it depends. There's a couple ways to look at this, right?
Do you kind of have to do it? You kind of have to. I think everyone in this, I'm sure the Rangers issued that statement knowing something like this was coming.
I don't know if I want to look at this from a journalistic standpoint or from the joke, right? Because the joke is, hey, you can beat the living crap out of a guy and essentially break every rule imaginable and only have to pay $5,000. You can disrespect the game of hockey and it only costs you $5,000, right? But if you hurt somebody's feelings by calling them out on the job they did, that's going to cost you $250,000, right? That's a joke to me. That's a joke. It's hilarious. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry you have your skin so thin that you can't take criticism from an Original Six franchise who was protecting its star player, who they paid nearly $12 million a year, who was a big part of their income, right? So that's the joke. Now, when I look at it like this, it depends who that statement came from again. That's that question in the air of where did the statement originate? If it originated from the front office and the players coming forward and doing this, then I'm like angry at the $250,000, right? I'm angry that you're going to do it. If it's James Dolan who knew that there was going to be consequences, James Dolan is saying if there's some world he's taking ownership. If it's James Dolan saying, I'm going to speak out and I know this is going to cost me money, good on you, you know? Because you're saying, I don't care what this is going to cost me. I'm standing by my players, you know? He's probably like, I don't like the firing. I wish it was still in the offseason, but if he's going to do it in the offseason. Don't do it in this moment. Something else has got to be going on. It's just too many pieces. So
You're so close to the end of the year too, right? Like right. Why? Like why?
I think there's 3 games left.
Yeah, why? What are you doing? Like,
I don't get that. So what are you? Because there's just too many. Something else is going on, right? Unless Davidson walked into this office and was like, "What are you doing making this statement?" He goes, "I'm defending my players," and he goes, you can't be just doing this. You're flying off the handles. This isn't the NBA. And Dolan said, great, you're fired. You know, unless it was like that, right? Like, then I don't know. I don't know. I'm not privy to that. I also don't know what this means for David Quinn. I still don't know what it means for him, right? They brought up that guy from the AHL. I'm never going to pronounce his last name correct until he's the head coach. Begins with a K. And they were on a win streak all of a sudden. So I'm wondering, like, if you know, Chris Drury's got the reins now. Chris Drury's a winner wherever he goes. You know, he didn't end his career the best, but that guy was like a Little League World Series champion, Stanley Cup champion with the Colorado Avalanche, Rookie of the Year. I think he won the Hobie Baker. The guy, you know, he's got a pedigree to him.
What do you think about really great former players going into executive roles? Because I'm a little skeptical oftentimes.
I have one example. Steve Yzerman.
That's one example.
One really good example.
I have a lot of Wayne Gretzky's out there as well.
But a lot of the guys that are executives are former players. They're just a few generations back, right? Like John
Define
Davidson.
Former players. More so, former players in executive roles oftentimes don't normally go great. There are guys here or there for the most part, but a lot of these guys either didn't play or were role players, something like that.
Are you including coaches?
I can be. I can't. I also think people have learned pretty quickly that I think Gretzky taught a lot of people that great players don't make great coaches.
Did you hear today?
I would probably more so say great players don't make great coaches, not players don't make great coaches. Because I think players make some of the best coaches, but it's oftentimes your, you know, like
superstars.
I think Rob Brindamore is maybe a little bit of an exception, but those guys that, you know, were third, fourth line guys, the guys that really had to learn the game to be good at it. I don't think Connor McDavid would be a great hockey coach because he plays how Connor McDavid does, and no one else can play like that. It's the guys that really had to grind their way to get through to, you know, do well. And that's what you can normally pass on to a group of other people. The guys that just were naturally talented oftentimes are not great at communicating other skills to, you know, a team.
Yeah. Peter Laviolette's an example of that right there. Peter Laviolette's a pretty solid coach. He's had some good success throughout it. I don't think he's won a cup yet. I think he was with one organization that might have won it in a different role. But I think he played 9 games in the NHL. You know, less than a cup of coffee. I think it's a good point. I think you brought up my exemptions to the rules. Like, Brendan Moore to me he's exempt from the rule because Brendan Moore to me is a damn good coach in Carolina. Fits that mold well. He's a different type of player.
He'll be an even better coach in Seattle.
I think so too. When he goes back with Francis, I'm still curious to see how Francis is as a GM. I'm not sold on.
It's interesting. I was reading a few articles about how Seattle's almost at a little bit of a disadvantage because if you remember correctly, Vegas had all their payment. Like Seattle only officially became a team last week because of their payment structure and when they actually submitted the payments. Vegas is on time, so they were able to participate in whatever it was 3 years ago trade deadline. So they were actually a part of trades and able to kind of maneuver and kind of have an almost and have a mini, expansion draft before their expansion draft. They were actually able to kind of start wheeling and dealing earlier. It will be interesting to see what Seattle does, just based off of the fact that they're going in at the expansion draft. Obviously, they can maneuver now, but they don't have any assets. So unless you're just trading away for cap space, normally even with trading away for cap space, teams want something to come back. So with you not having any assets right now, you could sign free agents, but Seattle really isn't going to be able to get the ball rolling until the expansion draft. So it'll be curious to see kind of how that goes in comparison to Vegas, because I do think Vegas had a little bit of a head start.
I agree. I agree. What do you say? I agree. That's just good facts. It's like, that's just the fact of the situation. I agree with the facts of the situation.
Do my homework. Glad you don't disagree.
Yeah. Glad we switched away.
We're on a little bit of a tangent. I know we can kind of,
but I like the tangent because I needed the tangent. I think my blood pressure
just needed a distraction. Just need to feel something else for once.
Yeah. I'm excited for Seattle. I think it's still the logo. I think is great. It grows on me day by day. At first I was like, but I felt the same way about Vegas. And I think Vegas has got some of the best. Minus the gold helmets, I think Vegas has got the best style. Maybe out west.
I only realized a month ago that the helmet in the Vegas logo made a V. I only noticed that like a month ago.
Really? Tyson.
I never liked them. I don't look at it that closely. I was like, all right, like helmet, kind of weird, but whatever.
That team's built for a run. I think that team. It's going to be Colorado versus Vegas.
It'll be interesting.
Whoever comes out of that wins. The West, at least. I think it'll be either Toronto. What do I think? I always go back and forth. Toronto.
I'm saying what I say before. I think Toronto's going. I don't know if they're going to win this year, but I think this is their year where they break through and they get to conference finals minimum.
You know what? I had Washington getting out of it, but they've had so many injuries and other stuff going on.
I don't think it's Washington's year.
You know what? I actually think it might be. It's either Pittsburgh or Boston. Boston's come on in the end here in a way that they needed to. There's still a chance they could win the division, which is crazy.
Toronto would only be able to play Boston in the finals, right? The conference finals?
Yeah. Oh, my God. Break the curse, Toronto. Break the curse.
To go to the Cup, too?
Oh, and then take on... It would be great to come out of there. Toronto, Colorado. You have a Toronto versus Nordiques matchup.
That'd be a good one. I think that might be my favorite.
That would be great.
I don't know who I'd want. I'd want Toronto to win, but that'd be a good matchup either way. If it's Toronto, Colorado, if that's Toronto, Colorado, I think Toronto edges it out. But it's tight. It's very tight. Two similar teams in different ways.
Two very deep teams. Very deep teams.
I think Toronto has the X factor of they have a lot of guys who it's their last shot. And I could really see that room rallying.
I would love to see Spezza and Thornton and Simmons and those guys, those vets take
Well, even you look at it like Galchenyuk, you know what I mean? Like, this is probably his last shot in terms of if he doesn't stick, he's probably out of the league, right? So you have your guys like Galchenyuk, Foligno, right? Like, guy's been a warrior forever.
I love Foligno. God, I love Foligno.
I could really see Toronto having something special just based off their... Obviously, they have their guys that have been around and should win, but also just like they have a scrappy group of guys that have maybe not had success elsewhere that I think are really coming together. And I think a lot more guys in that room, Joe Thornton especially, are realizing that this might be their last shot at it, and they have a really good chance at it.
Here's what I think about that, because I really appreciate the segue, so I don't blow a blood vessel. I think that the North Division is going to get exposed defensively against certain matchups in particular. I think Toronto's going to, in a matchup against Colorado, will get exposed defensively because the Colorado's D is by far and away a better defenseman. Even their young guys like Byram, those are just better defensemen.
Yeah.
And I think the Toronto relies heavily on their puck moving defensemen. That's why I wanted them to pick up more stay-at-home guys.
Which you do look at the fact, like I always like to say when I bring this up, you look at those Pittsburgh teams that won back-to-back. And look at those defensemen on those rosters. There's not a lot there.
Dude, who did they have? They had somebody. They have Letang, who's a great two-way, actually.
Although their second half of the back-to-back, they didn't have Letang.
That's right.
And that's where everyone said Pittsburgh's done. Like they have no one.
That's right.
They
had like Oli Mata.
That's where Ian Cole. That's where Ian Cole was really, really playing well. I was talking to him
Justin
earlier.
Schultz.
Justin Schultz was playing really, really well. Ron Hainsey was playing out of his mind.
I loved that. I loved 38 years old or something like that.
Yep, scoring goals in the finals. So that's kind of where I come to. You can do it, right? You don't need this NHL 21 superstar stack roster of defensemen. If you play smart like a team and really have solid systems, you can beat it. Look at the team. Look at the teams that Pittsburgh beat. You have San Jose and you have Nashville. Two solid, especially at the time, two very solid defensive teams that I'm sure defensively only, a lot of people would have taken the other teams as opposed to Pittsburgh there. But Pittsburgh played smart, and I think that's something that Toronto could really look to do. And I think they're capable of it.
I think Nashville might have my favorite defensive core in the league. I like Ekholm. I like Yossi. I like Fabro. I don't like my internet. I like hey, David Farrance just got signed there. He's a BU guy. I was watching him go. I loved watching him play here. Fabro's a BU guy too. They gotta, and that might be why I like him. Let's go back to the Rangers just to wrap it up. I don't think we're done with this. I think it's going to carry over. I'm hoping morale doesn't go with it. It tells you the Rangers are. I think I would like to think that there will be a new high that the team can reach because of this, because I don't think we've ever seen a team answer the call like this one in recent years. I can't remember a team that was essentially embarrassed by the league to a degree, or just, walked all over and then respond by having guys like Ryan Strome fighting. I've never seen Ryan Strome fight. He dropped him at a face-off circle. But a guy, I don't care if, it's not the big heavyweight tilts. Brendan Smith is a lifer as a Ranger. I've always been all over him and been really hard on him, especially because what we paid for him and what we had to give up because we had him on. He has proven this year his value in more ways than I could ever imagine. He's been an excellent mentor. And for him to go, nobody else that could take on Wilson is here, I'll do it. That to me, you're worth your money right there. In fact,
you almost know too, Wilson's a big guy. I'm probably
not
coming out of this looking too good.
6'4", 6'5". Brendan Smith is like, look, I'm just going to be looking for a job in the offseason. That's the way it was looking. And then he's like, well, they need a veteran defenseman. Why can't I stay? I'll take that pay cut. Maybe not making $4.2 million. I'll sign him for, $1.2 million. Give him what Jack Johnson was getting. Jack Johnson was on this team at one point. That was another thing I saw. It's like I saw James Dolan gave Jack Johnson over $1 million. You think he cares about $250,000 for a penalty?
It's basically throwing stuff away at that point.
Right. I think we done with this one.
I think that wraps it up. I'm good. I think we got. Do you feel at least like a little relieved, kind of having a therapeutic experience talking through it? Do you feel a little better at least, or still fiery?
I feel numb. I'm hoping that there's really a really bright light at the end of this tunnel, because Rangers fans, come on. We should be. I have a bias, but we don't deserve the past 72 hours. The fan base doesn't deserve the past 72 hours. No fan base deserves the past 72 hours. So, hopefully.
All right, and that's that.
This has been E2G Hockey with Dan and Tyson, part of the E2G Sports Network, home of the Unsung Sports Grid. Be sure to follow us at DC Blanda and at @TDurante_ on Twitter. Also follow us at E2G Hockey as well. Be sure to check out the website, listen to our podcast, go back, click back, dial back, and more to come. Thank you for listening.